he can't see me. Good day, everybody. What a wonderful tribute that the chapel is full. If you'd like to come down, there's some space here if you want to shuffle down. My name's Kath McKinney. I'll be presiding over this celebration of Paul's life. And we're gathered here to remember the life and to mourn the death of Paul. His family, Jeanette, Graham, Charlotte, Eloise and their family, welcome you today and invite you to participate as family and friends remember how we knew him. Today, you will all learn some more about Paul as you listen to the stories told by people that you may not know. While no person can be summed up in an hour, we can recognise that together we are a community of rememberers. Some of you may like to continue to share your memories with Paul's family, and you can go today sure of the knowledge that he was a man who lived his life well. I'm a minister, so I'll be offering some prayers today, but I do so inviting you to receive them in your own particular tradition. If I use the word God and you have another word, just replace it. We're here to celebrate and to acknowledge a sacred passing. So, loving God as we gather, look tenderly on those who mourn, as they are thankful for a life that has passed, but a spirit that remains present. Compel us all as we gather to continue to live with compassion and kindness as we farewell our friend. May we be assured of the divine love and grace that is present in the world. And as we gather, speak, and remember, may we be compassionate in our hearts, gentle with our words, gracious in our awareness of other people in the room, courageous in our thoughts, and brave in our love. As I was looking through my material after I'd met with Paul's family, I found a poem that I thought may be appropriate. It is called A Song of Living for a Life Well Lived. I have loved life. I have sent up my gladness on wings to be lost in the blue of the sky. I have run and leaped with the rain and have taken the wind to my breast. My cheeks like a drowsy child to the face of the earth, I have pressed down hard, I have loved life. I have kissed young love on the lips, and I have heard their song to the end of my days. I have struck my hand like a seal into the loyal hand of my friend. I have known the peace of heaven and the comfort of work done well. I have loved life. I gave a share of my soul to the world when and where my course ran. I know that others will finish any tasks I have surely left undone. I know that no flower nor flint was in vain on the many paths that I trod. As one looks on the face through a window, through life I have looked on the divine. I have loved life. I have loved it well. The family have received a number of messages from people who are overseas and who can't be here with us today, so I'm going to read them, starting with the message from Polly, his stepsister. So Polly writes, Paul was a big man with a big heart. His zest for life was infectious, and when in his company, you couldn't help but be swept up in his enthusiasm for pretty much everything, from food to politics to conspiracy theories. As his younger stepsister, I remember him as a teenager, either disappearing out of the door on his way to yet another party, or holed up in his room playing the drums loudly, punctuated by shouts from his mum, Paul, be quiet, which never worked. When I was older, I was lucky enough to stay with him when travelling in Australia with a friend. We arrived in Melbourne tired and hungry, having spent 3 days crossing the Nullarbor Desert by coach, and in strolls Paul to meet us. A nice cup of tea and an early night to recover, we think, but not a chance. According to Paul, we needed to start as we meant to go on. So we were whisked straight to the nearest bar, rucksacks and all, where we partied into the early hours. And that is pretty much how the rest of our stay continued. A whirlwind of clubs, bars, food, more food, and generally having fun. Something that Paul certainly knew how to do with his huge circle of friends who clearly adored him. Needless to say, they were the two of the best weeks of our travels. So whenever I remember Paul, Polly writes, it will be someone who, despite the challenges life threw at him, lived a rich, colourful and full life, and someone who knew how to party, heart and soul. It was a privilege to know him. Now we're going to hear from someone who knew him best from the very start of his life, and so we ask his mum, Jeanette, to come up. Yeah.
Okay, can everybody hear? I always worry about people hearing since I can never hear anything, so fine. Fantastic to see you all. Wonderful selection of people. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. I tell you, Paul was born with a caul over his head, a very unusual occurrence. For some, this is a herald of greatness, such as Napoleon, Lord Byron, even Liberace. For others, it was an omen of bad luck. Paul, I feel, had both. As a child, Paul was always having accidents. At 6 months, he disappeared from his pram and was found hanging down the side, held back by the restrainers designed to actually keep him in. He was still smiling when I found him. He fell down the stairs at 18 months. A year later, he fell into a fish pond. And in later years, he fell off bikes, horses, ladders. If he could climb it or ride it, he could fall off it. In Perth, he fell off a stage while performing and badly damaged his leg, but insisted on continuing the gig. For Paul, always, the show must go on. His life was a chapter of accidents until he brought the house down with the car crash in Melbourne that left him in the wheelchair. He was always happy as a child, and as an adult was able to make jokes about himself and his various predicaments that he found himself in. At school, he didn't prove very academic, in spite of his obvious musical ability. He consequently left school at 16, took his first job as a petrol pump attendant. For you youngsters, that was the day before self-service. And of course, this lasted for a week before he scratched the side of a brand new Jaguar by dragging the hose across the shiny paintwork. They weren't impressed. Shortly after, he took off on a great adventure around Europe, carrying a guitar, a tent, a watch, and £60 that he'd saved up. How he survived, we will never know. Suffice to say, his tent was stolen, his watch was left on the train, but somehow he managed to hang on to the guitar. 6 months later, when we'd all given him up as missing, save for the occasional postcard that said, "I'm alive, send money," I received a midnight phone call from St Pancras Station. "Mum, I'm home. Can you come and fetch me?" Lovely. While Paul was away, my current husband and I had decided to get married and emigrate to Perth, which of course he didn't know anything about, being totally incommunicado. So it came as a bit of a surprise to him when he got back. So we decided he had to come out with us. We were worried about his welfare. So he arrived 3 months after us, leaving the plane slightly unsteady, having celebrated his 19th birthday while in the air. He was carrying a Sainsbury's, that's a supermarket for you people who don't know, a Sainsbury's bag with all his belongings and very little money. "I'm not stopping, I'm going back. I'm going back in 3 weeks," he announced. Of course, as it happened, he never saw England again, and instead made a very happy career as a very good musician and entertainer. On one occasion, while in Perth, he got an Arts Council grant to travel with his band to remote Aboriginal communities in North Territory. This was an eye-opening experience, not only for him and the band, but presumably also for the Indigenous people. Eventually, he decided to leave Perth for the bright lights of Melbourne and make his own history here. Apart from his capacity to love, Paul's greatest quality was his ability to remain cheerful and optimistic, even in the most appalling circumstances. Michael Connolly, writing about a paralysed musician, expressed my feelings about Paul exactly. "I learned so much from this man who became a friend. I learned perseverance. I learned compassion. I learned what it is to make do with the cards you are dealt. I saw firsthand the resilience of the human spirit. He never asked, why me? He just asked, what's next? He was a hero to me because he took what life gave him and made the best of it. In many ways, that was more beautiful than the music he made with his instrument. Thank you, Paul, for a wonderful life."
Words from Joe Orr. You don't often get a clap at a funeral. Well done. Words from Joe Orr, his stepbrother. I visited Australia during Easter in 1984 when Paul was living in a flat in Perth and was the singer and the guitarist with a rhythm and blues band. I saw them play a couple of times during my visit. He was Elroy Flicker and his band were the Fitzroy Gutter Slugs. I'd never been to a live gig before, and Paul's musicianship and charisma on stage really impressed the 13-year-old in me. He certainly lived the rock and roll lifestyle, right down to driving around in a 1950s Chevrolet. For 2 days I hung out with the coolest big brother a boy could have. He taught me my first few guitar chords and showed me a few simple rhymes on a snare drum that he had happened to have lying around. He also gave me my first and ever so slightly illegal driving lesson down one of Perth's side roads. I left Australia wearing a leather jacket and carrying a snare drum packed in my suitcase, which Paul had kindly donated to me, both of which were eyed with suspicion by the custom officer in Heathrow and met with a look of dread from my mother. I did a lot of growing up in the short time that I hung out with Paul, and although I only spent a couple of days with him, his influence extended well into my early years. Paul's enthusiasm and generosity helped open the door to music and a taste for beer. It's down to him that I learned to play the drums and played in bands, which was one of the highlights of my youth. So thank you, Paul, and thank you, Elroy Flicker. We're now going to hear a poem read by a friend of the family, David Stagg.
This poem, Death is Nothing at All, by Henry Scott Holland, was chosen by Jeanette, Paul's mother. I first met Paul 25 odd years ago when I got a call from Jeanette. I'm a solicitor, and she wanted a solicitor to act for Paul in his court case. So I've been involved in Paul's life for a jolly long time, and Jeanette and I have become very close friends, and she's invited me to read this poem, which I think sums up Paul pretty well. Death is nothing at all. It does not count. I've only slipped away into the next room. Nothing has happened. Everything remains exactly as it was. I am I, and you are you. And the old life that we lived so fondly together is untouched, unchanged, whatever we were to each other, that we are still. Call me by my old familiar names. Speak of me in the easy way which you always used. Put no difference into your tone. Wear no forced air of solemnity or sorrow. Laugh as we always laughed at the little jokes that we enjoyed together. Play, smile, think of me, pray for me. Let my name be ever the household word that it always was. Let it be spoken without an effort, without the ghost of a shadow upon it. Life means all that it ever meant. It is the same as it ever was. There is absolute and unbroken continuity. What is this death but a negligible accident? Why should I be out of mind because I am out of sight? I am but waiting for you for an interval somewhere very near, just around the corner. All is well. Nothing is hurt. Nothing is lost. One brief moment, and we will all be as it was before. How we shall laugh at the trouble of parting when we meet again.
Words from Karen Asher, Paul's cousin. Whatever happened to Paul, he always faced the world with unparalleled hope and optimism. I was lucky enough to spend time growing up with him when I used to visit my cousins in Hampstead, London, as a child in the 70s. We would spend hours during sleepovers talking about music, and he introduced me to many LPs I would probably never have listened to otherwise. When I hear Jimi Hendrix' Electric Ladyland and Band on the Run by Wings, it takes me back to that time and the fond memories that I shared with Paul strumming his guitar. He took me, his very naive country cousin, aged probably no more than 13 or 14, there's a theme emerging here, to a drug and alcohol-fueled party. But he looked after me as he was a whole year older. Our parents never knew where we were, as we always lied as to where we were going. When someone you care about passes away, there's a strong temptation to remember them perhaps a little too well. The most shining characteristics of our loved ones make it into the version of them that we keep with us when they depart. But that's not necessarily the case for Paul, as he was a one-off. Misdeeds are forgotten, but I can still remember that Paul never wanted to wash as a teenager. His mum used to battle with him to get into the bathroom to wash himself, and his long hair that greatly offended our old-fashioned granddad, who never understood why he'd want to look like a girl. When Paul moved to Australia, I moved to the Middle East, and I never saw him again. But I will never forget the great times we spent together as children, and because of the caring son, father, brother, cousin, friend, and all-round good bloke that he was, Paul will be missed by many. But greater than the sorrow for his departure is the joy that he spread in his life, through his guitar playing, wisdom, wit, and love that will continue to guide his daughters throughout their lives. Heaven will be a wild and beautiful place where you left the party down here way too early. Much love to you, your cousin, Karen. Now Graham is going to come and deliver the eulogy. Thank you, Graham.
Okay, more stories about Paul. Hello, I am Graham. I'm Paul's older brother. If you think of something slightly Paul-shaped, I'd probably just about fit into it and look more or less the same. Great to see so many people here today, especially to hear about Paul. Some things that you'll know, some things that you won't. But as we've said, to start with, Paul and accidents. I think myself and my mother wanted to write something about Paul. The first thing we started with was accidents, and Paul's long relationship with accident and emergency and things like that. He was always having them, but always more of an accident than others. He came off his bike when I was with him. He didn't come off his bike, he flew off his bike. He actually went like that. He landed and broke his collarbone. We had to take him to hospital that time. He got bitten by a dog, but he didn't get bitten by a dog. He got savaged by a dog. He had, if you ever saw under his beard, he had some scars under here where a dog had gone for him. But it didn't put him off cycling, as probably you know. It didn't put him off dogs. He had loads of dogs, so none of this seemed to worry him. Got roughed up by some skinheads one time when his own dog looked on, just happily watching the thing. But I think he saw the same skinheads the next day and had a chat with them. So Paul never, everything with Paul was day to day. The next day, nothing else, nothing else had occurred. He's a popular boy, and sort of teenage, about 16, 17, starting to see his rebel years a bit, but he received lots of invitations. He was invited to leave school early, as soon as possible. He was invited to leave quite a lot of pubs at the time and not come back. That was a particular one. And one night he was invited into the police cells for, I think it was for playing his harmonica in a manner likely to be of danger to himself and the public. So that's quite dangerous playing. I think the police may have made that one up especially for him, but he did have to go up in the courts the next day, so he has got a criminal record. So I think he's very proud of that. It hasn't held him back. Yeah, at that sort of time, you couldn't get Paul home. He stayed out a lot. He stayed out at night quite a lot, and when we did get him home, we wished he was staying out a bit more. But he did set off for Europe. He did it with, I think, no planning at all. He just sort of got a knapsack, got a tent, got a direction of France, set off. I don't know that there was any plan to this. The way I heard it, he did pitch his tent the first night in a French field somewhere. It could have been a roundabout, for all I know. He just pitched it. He went into the local village, took his guitar, serenaded the locals, I believe, tried to find his tent on the way home. Thought he was lost, realised that the French had liberated his tent and all his belongings. But, he's indestructible. I think this is the thing I wanted to say about Paul, and the theme is he is indestructible. Most people would have gotten a train home and said, I'm done with that holiday. Paul went straight back into the village to the pub where he started to see what could be done. the way I heard it from Paul, I didn't hear much about this, but there was a youngish woman in the bar who was prepared to take him home, and kept him prisoner for a week or two, willing prisoner, I think. Gave him an education he wasn't expecting. After a while, put some money in his pocket, sent him on his way. So I think that's quite a good start to a holiday. But he did last 6 months somehow on the continent. I hope he didn't go to Pamplona, because that would have been carnage if he'd been there. But probably the bulls would have come off worse. But he did come back in 6 months. We really didn't hear from him. We didn't know where he was. But he did come home. I think he was hoping to come home, but his home was about to come to Australia, which was something of a surprise to him. So he did come as well. So he fancied a holiday. This is developing into a bit of a theme, but he said to me, I will be back in 3 weeks. I'm not stopping. He said, I'll get a job and I'll earn the fare back, because he was on a one-way ticket. He said, I'll get a job in 3 weeks. So I said, Paul, what are you going to get a job as? A sort of lawyer, or some sort of high-flying businessman, or what's it going to be to earn that money? He didn't have an answer, but he did get a job on a delivery van, I think, and it didn't pay quite as well as he thought, so he wasn't back in 3 weeks. Instead, he seemed to discover rock and roll with many people here, with the shuffling Hungarians in Perth, and that kept him there. So he didn't really tell me he wasn't coming back at that point. I got a call from his landlord in England, who was worried about the smell in his room. Turned out it was a wet Afghan coat, and they are pretty smelly. So that was one of the first times I put all his possessions into a skip. There's been many others since, but clearing out that room was one of the first. I did hang on to his guitars. I did bring some guitars out for him. But he took up here where he left off. He started having some more accidents. He certainly pranged 3 cars, to my knowledge, in Perth, maybe that one. If there's anyone from the insurance industry, it was 2 cars, but maybe just 1, but yeah, 3. Not to do any great damage to himself, just damage to the cars. I used to come over every so often in those days and try and see Paul performing, so make some tapes, rough old cassette tapes. So I kept them for my own entertainment. If you're interested, you can find them on the internet now. Probably it's still there just for my entertainment. But Elroy Flicker, Shuffling Hungarians, what we got, Tritones, Hi-Fi Set, Dirty Hanks, Bootless and Unhorsed. Played with lots of different bands. He either played with them, or he played for them, or he formed them. And that's how he lived. You know, he lived from night to night. He liked to go and play different places. And I expect he usually got paid about $50 out of the till. Things like that. That's how his life was going. I don't know if he had any particular plan, but of course his life was changed when he came into the car accident, where he showed how indestructible he really was, because to come out of that was quite amazing. But with the help of lots of friends and medical staff and carers, came out of that, started to reinvent. There were lots of nice benefit concerts at that time. I'm sure many of you played in them. They were really helpful to Paul to raise money, because